Welcome to the Vendetta Sports Media Daily Show. I am back once again. We're going back to back for me, but that's all right because I enjoy talking to you, Julian. Julian, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm excited. It's going to be a good weekend here in Phoenix. Everything's going crazy. Uh, walking to class and seeing NFL players. I was on my way to class and saw Orlando Brown walking around Phoenix yesterday. So that's pretty wild. And we got Waste Management upcoming this weekend and the Super Bowl, obviously. So really the big events, and it's a crazy time of year for sure, especially to be here in Phoenix.
I didn't even think about that. So you're just walking around. You're like, there's an NFL guy. There's an
Yep.
NFL guy.
Yep.
What are the plans for the weekend for the Super Bowl?
Well, I'm going to Waste Management on Saturday. I
Hmm.
had to. I couldn't let that opportunity slip away from me again, like it did last year. So I had to go to Waste Management this year, and then I think Sunday is going to be a little more relaxing day. I want to take in all the spectacles of the Super Bowl and just enjoy it. What about you? What are you doing?
Yeah, that's about the same for me. I got this weekend, a little bit off topic, but I got a birthday party tonight with some friends that I got to go to. And then I shouldn't say have to go to. I'm going to. They're my friends. And then Saturday we got UFC 284, so I'll be watching that. Sunday got the Super Bowl, so I've got a busy weekend too. Lots of sports, so I have
It's a
absolutely no
wild week in
complaints.
sports. I
It
mean, the
is.
trade deadline came and went,
Hmm.
and then we're getting going. Pitchers and catchers are reporting to spring training pretty soon here. Obviously, the end of the NFL season, the end of football for a little while. That's all right.
Yeah, we're getting ready to start transitioning over to draft stuff and to some MLB stuff. So that should be exciting in its own right. But most importantly, it is the Super Bowl. It's the Friday before the Super Bowl. So what would we be doing if we weren't previewing the Super Bowl? And so to start it off, let's talk about some X factors. Both teams, offensive and defensive. So let's start with the Chiefs here. Who are some X factors that you're looking at heading into this weekend's game?
At least on the offensive side of the ball, it's the same X factor that it's been for the last 3-4 seasons. It's going to be Patrick Mahomes to Travis Kelsey, and Kelsey is going to be the big guy. He's going to have at least the Kansas City Chiefs are not going to win the game if Travis Kelsey has less than 8 or 9 receptions. It's just not going to happen. They need to get to him often. They can't let Philadelphia shut him down. They've got to attack the middle with him. And if there's anybody that knows how to game plan to get the ball in Travis Kelsey's hands, it's been Andy Reid. We've
Mhm.
seen. And to go along with that, on defense, an X factor for Philadelphia would be CJ Gardner Johnson. Because I think that he's going to have a big responsibility to shut down Kelsey in a lot of plays. He's going to have to. He's probably the best tackler in Philadelphia's secondary, so he's going to need to. He's going to need to hit. He's going to need to hit Kelsey quite a few times. Get to him early. Maybe get a pass breakup in the first couple of plays in the game. Set the tone, and that's really what's going to be a big difference for the Eagles is how they play Kelsey, and especially the play of a guy like Gardner Johnson.
Yeah, and especially in a year where the Chiefs don't really have that great of offensive weapons in that system right now. It's just, well, I shouldn't say like this year's a down year in comparison to some previous years. So they need Travis Kelsey a little bit more right now than they have in the past. Obviously, when you have guys like Tyreek Hill, you're not as one dimensional or as depending on one player.
Yet they're still in the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's an amazing feat. But I'm with you. They need that Kelsey and Mahomes connection to really step up, play well. But I think the offensive line also has to step up where the Eagles have a great pass rush, and I think that could be a big difference in this game. Hopefully, Patrick Mahomes' ankle is okay at this point, or at least better. But if it gets to the point where his movement is not at 100%, and the Eagles really start getting home and landing some shots in him, that could change this game quickly too.
Yeah, and we saw what Philadelphia was able to do last game when they were able to get to Brock Purdy as much as they did early in that one, and then
Hmm.
obviously they ended up injuring him, and Cincinnati in the AFC Championship game, they didn't get after Mahomes as much as they probably could have. I think that I think Kansas City's offensive line won a lot of the times, and I think that's one of the most underrated groups in the entire league is Kansas City's offensive line. They've
Yeah.
got stars all over the place, so I mean, that's really that's really going to be another X factor is the play of Kansas City's offensive line versus that Hassan Reddick and all the guys that they have on that D line. And we talked
Yeah.
about kind of being depleted on offense, at least at the wide receiver perspective, and it's only getting worse because they've had a couple injuries here now. So McCole Hardman is probably not going to play in the Super Bowl. It's
Mhm.
looking like right now he got injured. He hurt his pelvis, I believe it was his pelvis in the AFC Championship game against the Bengals, and that's a tough injury for a receiver. Can't really
Yeah.
cut as well, can't really turn as well. So route running is really going to be down. Plus Kadarius Toney, I know he's got a ankle problem along with a hamstring. And yeah, also Juju Smith-Schuster was featured on the injury report this past week too. But I think Toney and Smith-Schuster have a more likely chance to play than Hardman. I don't think Hardman's going to play. So Philadelphia's secondary can really get after Kelsey now because they
Mhm.
have to. Everybody's going to be keying in on Kelsey. You got to think that they're going to have two guys on him almost every play. I
Yep.
mean, why wouldn't you? You would want him. You'd want Pat to throw to Juju Smith-Schuster or injured Kadarius Toney or whoever else like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and I know he's healthy right now, so I expect him to get a lot of targets.
Yeah.
You
And
want
there's
somebody else except for Kelsey to beat you.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways you can play that too, where you have options not only because the Chiefs are a little bit banged up, but also because the Eagles have a really good secondary. So there's some moving pieces where you can work with that, where you can maybe play Darius Slay manned up on somebody and have Slay shut somebody down, and then that gives you two guys that you can kind of play with to put on Kelsey. So there's some different packages and some ways that you can approach that situation that the Eagles have a little bit more of a luxury to do just simply because they have such a good secondary.
Yeah, I trust their defensive coordinator to
Mhm.
figure that out.
Yep.
And another, so kind of moving on from Philadelphia's secondary,
Mhm.
another huge X factor that's going to be important is L'Jarius Sneed cleared concussion protocol, and he will be playing in the Super Bowl for Kansas City. That's a bigger storyline than people were giving credit to. L'Jarius Sneed is an extremely underrated player. He's very important for that Kansas City secondary. He's actually the oldest guy in that secondary, and I should say in the cornerback room, and he's 25 years old.
Yeah.
So like they really need a guy like Sneed in the Super Bowl, um, and they got him back. And don't be surprised if he's shadowing AJ Brown for the majority of the game. He's Kansas City has had packages this year where they've had their number one corner shadow the number one receiver the entire game. And if that does happen, and you get into a situation where Snead is one on one versus AJ Brown, he can't get beat deep because if he gets beat deep, then that's going to be the way Philadelphia is going to try and get the ball down the field. And I bet that they take a shot early. That's what happened against the New York Giants. They also took a shot early against San Francisco, both to Devontae Smith, both pretty outstanding catches, although the one against San Francisco probably was not a catch.
Yeah. Not a catch. No
It's
chance.
irrelevant now, but yeah, it probably was not a catch.
Yeah.
So
And kind of going off the back of that too, like that Chiefs secondary is not like the deepest group. They were playing very young, very inexperienced guys there in the AFC Championship game. Those guys played well. I mean, it's not like they were bad, but at the same time, the Super Bowl is another level. And you don't want to have to rely on those guys, right? The depth is obviously beneficial. Getting Snead back is very, very beneficial. So it's kind of taking that group that you can look at as a weakness for Kansas City in terms of their overall roster and adding another player that's really, been a staple of that secondary throughout the year.
what they might be able to do, or what, excuse me, they did against Cincinnati, and what they may not be able to do against Philadelphia was rush the passer as much. Philadelphia obviously has probably the best offensive line in football, maybe the best offensive line we've seen in the NFL in the past couple of years.
Mhm.
Yeah, they can block like crazy. I mean, Jason Kelsey, Landon Dickerson,
Lane
Lane Thomas,
Johnson,
Lane Johnson. Excuse me. Yeah,
great group.
they have a crazy group up there, and um, Kansas City was able to get to Joe Burrow last week, and that really was an important part of them winning that game. So we're gonna have to see.
And that Chiefs D line is good, right? It's got a handful of really good players: Chris Jones, Frank Clark, some great players there, but they're not as deep of a unit either, where they're really led by a handful of top tier talents. Where when you're going up against the Eagles' offensive line, they have top tier talent in their own right on that offensive line group.
I remember when the Eagles were just horrible in 2020 and like 2019, and
Hmm.
they had came off that Super Bowl high, and their roster was just a mess. And the job that they've done, Howie Roseman, and that whole front office, and they have successfully turned it around, and their roster is just ridiculous.
Yep.
Like every position group has a star, and they're all just so deep too. I mean,
Yep.
they
A
made
lot
like
of depth.
they made like three mid-season move. They lost one game, remember, to the Commanders. I believe that game was in October, November. They lost that
Hmm.
game, and the next day they went out and signed Javon Hargrave, and they signed McDermott Sue because they gave up 150 rushing yards.
Yep.
It's just the way that they operate there is they've established a winning culture these last few seasons, and they have a real good chance to do it. They have a real good chance, man. They have a
Yeah,
good
and
chance.
they made a lot of good moves too, where a lot of the things were not like, this is a result of their good moves as a GM for what Howie Roseman did, where they won that AJ Brown trade. They made a nice draft pick with Devonta Smith. They progressed Jalen Hurts at a good pace and made a good selection with him too. So it's not like they lucked into this, where they made a lot of smart moves, added a lot of depth. The Chauncey Gardner trade was a good trade too, where they got him from the Saints. And so they're making good moves and kind of built the roster that way. They didn't just like luck into this. They methodically built this team back up.
And they made a good hire at head coach. I thought
Hmm.
Sirianni. I wasn't so sold on the hire when they first hired him, but he ended up being really what they needed.
Yep.
So we'll have to see. I'm excited for this one.
Yep.
I really
Me
am.
too. And
Yeah.
and I have the same exact opinion as you on Sirianni, where I was a little bit wishy washy at first, but it's proven to be a good hire. Um, and then in terms of predictions, obviously, once again, would not be doing it right if we were not giving a prediction. So, what is your prediction for the game? And I'll give mine once you wrap your thoughts up.
So I went. What did I go? 1 for 2 last week. I picked Kansas City. I think no, I picked. Excuse me. I picked Cincinnati, and then
Mhm.
I picked Philadelphia to win. Um, the conference championship games were not really what I was expecting, but we did get two decently good games. As far as this game, I think Philadelphia is going to get out to an early lead. I think that they're going to take a shot on the first drive of the game to AJ Brown, and he's going to beat L'Jarius Sneed on the first drive of the game. And I think Philadelphia is going to go out early. They're going to go out on top. But I think it's a long game, and I think the Chiefs defense will figure it out. They'll make adjustments. The secondary will make adjustments. I think they'll contain Hurts enough in the second half. And I think that they will end up pushing it late. And I think it's going to be a close Super Bowl. I really do. I don't see either of these teams blowing the other one out. I just don't think that's going to happen. I'm going to go Chiefs by field goal.
Ooh, okay, okay. I'm on the opposite side here, but a lot of the similar logic where I think it's going to be a close game too. I'm leaning Eagles myself. I don't really have a score, but one possession. I'd say there where I just think they're the deeper roster, which is what I'm valuing here. A little bit better on the offensive line. I trust their defensive pass rush more. I just think overall their defense is a little bit better. And if I had to pick a one defense to perform and trust in the Super Bowl, I'm going to lean towards Philly. And the offensive line plays a big thing as well, where, they're not going to be as one-dimensional because that offensive line is so good that they can run the ball successfully because they can open those run lanes. They can pass block. They can pass block for Jalen Hurts as well. So I think that offensive line is going to be the difference maker on offense, and then just in general, I think their defense is the better of the two. So I lean Eagles, but every time that I've had this conversation or anything close to it, I've came back to the thought that I'm not really in the business of picking against Patrick Mahomes. I don't like picking against Patrick Mahomes, but in this case, I'm going to do it. And if I'm wrong, I'm going to kick myself for picking against him.
Hey, sorry, I just lost you for a second. I just kind of went down.
Yeah.
I just missed the end of that. I heard you got the Eagles by one possession, and then we kind of cut off there.
Yeah, Eagles. We'll run it back real quick, not too much, but Eagles by one possession. I think the defensive is better. The offensive line is stronger. Should help them there. And I don't really like picking against Patrick Mahomes, but that's what I'm doing here. And if I'm wrong, I'm going to kick myself over it. But right now, I do think the Eagles are the better overall team, despite not having the better of the two quarterbacks.
Yeah. So we're having some issues here, but yeah, I caught the end of that time.
Perfect.
It's gonna be tough for Kansas City at the end of the day to get to Jalen Hurts, and I would not be shocked if the Eagles are hoisting the Lombardi Trophy.
Yeah.
But just real quick, last thing, if you had to pick a Super Bowl MVP, who are you picking?
Ooh, well, since I said Eagles, I got to keep it on the Eagles side. And at this point, I think they're pretty much making it a quarterback award. So I'll go Hurts. But if anyone else were to break out of that, I would pick A.J. Brown. But I'm going to have to go Hurts. How about you?
I would love to see a tight end get it. And if there's a tight end to get it, it's Travis Kelce.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you. That would cap off the year of the Kelces.
Yep.
If Travis were able to land that there. So I'd like that. I'm a big fan of the Kelces. I like both of them. So if that were to happen, I would not be too mad about it.
No, me neither.
All right. Now that we've got the Super Bowl in the rearview mirror, let's go back to the NBA trade deadline. Yesterday, me and Garrett talked a little bit of trade deadline, but honestly, there's a bunch to talk about here. So we're not going to be repeating much here. So let's start off with the Nets. The Nets were the biggest movers of the deadline. What are you thinking with the current movement of the Nets, where the direction of that team is going, and then the two trades they made to send out Kyrie and KD?
So obviously those two big trades were the big trades of the deadline. And when they traded Kyrie Irving and they got what they got, I was a little bit, cautious about what this deadline is going to look like. Is there going to be a lot of sellers? Is there going to be a lot of teams that are trading big? Because, Dallas didn't give up necessarily that much to get Kyrie Irving. They only gave up, two solid players in Finney Smith, a good 3-and-D guy in Finney Smith, and Dinwiddie, who can be a primary scorer for a team like Brooklyn. And then they gave up a 2029 first-round pick. So I was a little confused by that one. I thought Brooklyn could have got a little bit more for Kyrie Irving, especially with what was apparently on the table. But they must have known that they could have gotten a better offer down the line, a much better offer for Kevin Durant. Mm-hmm. And they said, "Hey, man, we know we're probably gonna have to trade Kyrie Irving. Let's just go all in, trade Kevin Durant, work with the roster we have now, get a ton from the Suns, and you then just work with it." I mean, the Suns gave up almost their whole future. Yep. I mean, they gave up depth in Johnson and Crowder, even though it was rumored that Crowder wanted out, or that they pushed him out.
Yeah, regardless, he's still a part of the trade.
Right. And Bridges is an excellent player who they probably will need down the stretch.
One of the best defenders in the league.
Yep. There's a reason, he's getting paid what he is.
Mm-hmm.
And a 23 first rounder, a 25 first rounder, and a 27 first rounder, and a 29 first rounder. I mean, that's the odd numbers of the next 10 years, 8 years, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So I mean that's a haul for
It is.
a player,
Mhm.
and you can't hate if you're a fan of Brooklyn. I mean, you gave up those. This experiment is over. It's
Mhm.
been over. I don't think you guys were winning a finals this year, even with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. So might as well just gear up for the future, you know?
Yeah. I'm a fan of being all in or all out. I don't think there's any room to play the middle ground, especially in the NBA where yeah, you can get the 6th seed year in and year out and you can be the Wizards and Wizards have
Yeah.
slipped obviously now they're a little bit worse than that even, which is saying something about why that didn't work. But like with the Kyrie trade, I think the Kyrie trade is interesting because they didn't get much, but at the same time, I don't think they had any leverage in those negotiations.
Nope.
They probably could have got a little bit more, especially it sounds like that Lakers trade. They were offering a little bit more, but like that's a fine trade. Just wash your hands of Kyrie. I don't hate it. And then if you're getting 4 first round picks for KD, that's not terrible either. If I were a Nets fan, the reason I would be kicking myself here is because we don't have our own 1st round picks. The Rockets have your own 1st round picks. And that's the issue here is that if you have your own picks, it makes this rebuild a little bit easier if you struggle, if you're tanking. But they don't have their own 1st round picks. And now they're in a position where you have to depend on the Suns to be bad. And you're kind of tanking almost for the Rockets. I think the Rockets might be the biggest winner of all this.
They ended up getting a good amount back, and obviously, like what you said about being all in or all out. That's what the NBA is now.
Mhm.
Teams are there's 10 teams that are going to win the finals, or that are going to contend for the finals, I should say, and then there's 15 teams that are not going to contend for the finals, and then there's 5 to 10 teams every year that are just kind of middling in the middle ground, and then they end up not being there, right? And they end up making the playoffs as an 8 seed, and then they get bounced in the first round, and you're like the Detroit Pistons, where you're like, oh, okay, we just made the playoffs, but
Mhm.
meanwhile we just got our asses kicked by Milwaukee. So
Yep.
I was
Notable
thinking,
Pistons fans here from when we got swept by Braun 4-0 in the 1st round, one of the few
yeah,
times. And then you trade for Blake Griffin, and now you're running Drummond and Griffin. You know you're not going to win a chip, and that's a whole nother discussion of its own. But it's a great
yeah,
example of middling.
yeah, and that happens all the time in the NBA. So I mean, I respect Brooklyn more than anything because they they sat there and they evaluated and they say, "Hey, man, we're not going to sit on our hands and let the fans dictate what we do.
Mhm.
Like we have to move on from these guys. They're obviously probably 3 Hall of Famers they had in the last year, and now they're all gone. It's
Yep,
just crazy. It's
it
it's
is.
it's pretty unprecedented. It's unprecedented in what happened for them to all sign there and like to team up and try and win a championship. But it's even more unprecedented that James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant played a total of 16 games.
That's insane. That's not a good number. 16 is not a good number at all.
No, it's not.
And then so this kind of reshapes the West as well because now you've got the Mavericks are significantly better and the Suns are also significantly better. So right now, who are your teams that you're looking at? Obviously, you still have the Nuggets at the top, the Grizzlies at the top, some other teams that weren't as active on deadline day, but it still really shook up the West. So where are you looking right now for some teams that stand out amongst all this movement?
So the Suns obviously jump, to the sky.
Hmm.
With Kevin Durant, you can have. I know they gave up a lot of depth, but they still have a decent bench, and that starting 5 is just ridiculous. I mean, they have scores everywhere, they have talent everywhere. Kevin Durant, I think, is a great fit with Phoenix. If I had to pick a team to win the West right now, I'd probably pick Phoenix. But that's just a prediction. But the all the odds, I've got the list of the odds here. I'm going to read them out.
Go
It's
for it.
from Points Bets. We've got the Suns at plus 210. They're the leaders right now. Then it's Denver at plus 325. The Clippers have the third best odds at plus 600. The Warriors who are a 9 seed, have the fourth best odds in the West at plus 800. Then the Grizzlies, the Mavericks at plus 900. And then we get into the teams that kind of have less of a chance.
Yep.
The Pelicans at plus 2,200. The Lakers at plus 3,000. And then all the way down here, the 3 seed in the West, the 3 seed near the halfway point of the season, the Kings are plus 4,000.
Man, that's disrespectful.
That's just disrespectful.
I don't think they're going to make it to the finals, right? That's not really a hot take either. But plus 4,000,
Right.
come on, at least put them in the 2,000s. What are we doing here?
The Pelicans have much better odds than them. The Lakers have better. I mean, I get that they didn't. If I'm the Kings, I mean, why don't you go make a move? Why don't you try and get in on Kyrie Irving? Maybe I don't know. They had a chance here. They've got a good roster. They kind of held their hands at the deadline.
Yeah, I don't know that they needed to make a move for a star because I feel like they have a good rotation going. But even if you're just adding like a bench player or two, or maybe there'll be a team that's looking to get active in the buyout market. But I think you're right where they could have done a thing or two to maybe advance themselves. And that West is tough. Garrett asked me yesterday about the Nuggets, and it's like I like the Nuggets, and maybe I go back on what I said yesterday. He asked me if I thought the Celtics or Nuggets would go deeper in the playoffs, and I said Celtics because they're in the East, solely because they're in the East. But the Nuggets may be able to make it out of the West. I don't know. That West is tough, man. It's
the
really
West
tough.
It's going to be tough now for the Nuggets to win the West just because of what happened in the trade deadline. I thought before the trade deadline, the clear favorite in the West was Denver. But they've got. I still think that Denver probably has the most complete roster of any team in the West, and I really think that they can get there. Who's going to go farther between the Celtics and the Nuggets? I'm going to have to agree with you guys there. I would say the Celtics, just because I think the East is definitely a factor there. It's going to be tough for any team besides the Celtics to win the East. So they've definitely got the advantage there. But I like what Denver did at the trade deadline. They didn't really give up too much. They didn't say, "Hey, man, we're going to go in and get a star." Like, now they got Thomas Bryant, which was a good depth add, and I think they filled need more than anything at this deadline. And so I'm excited to see what they can do. I'm really rooting for them. Trading off Bones Highland was tough, but I knew that they kind of had to do that, right? Because he was kind of on his way out from what the reports were. So they had to give up Bones. They didn't really get a lot for that. But other than that, I think yeah, go ahead.
On the flip side of that, the Clippers had a nice trade deadline, I thought, where they got off John Wall. They brought in Eric Gordon, right? I think it was, and Bones Highland. That's two really good bench players there for you, or maybe they have Eric Gordon start, depending on how they want to run those lineups. But that was a team that got better, and at the same time, didn't really have to overpay for anything. Bones Highland for 2 second-round picks is a good deal.
Reggie Jackson was rumored to want out, and plus they got rid of him. They traded him, and they got Mason Plumlee. So that's pretty good return for that kind of pick. And they replaced Jackson essentially with Bones Highland. So yeah, I thought the Clippers had a pretty good deadline as well. Kind of quietly though. I think they're flying under the radar a little bit. They added depth pieces, obviously with these massive moves in the West. Everybody was just like, "Hey, look at the Suns, look at the Mavericks." But the Clippers had a nice deadline. The Rockets, like we said before, had a nice deadline. Obviously, they're not contending, but they still had a decent deadline.
And the Clippers aren't going to. You said the Clippers aren't really getting the credit, and it's because they went after depth, right? They went after depth, wanted to round out the roster. You're just not going to snag any headlines when you're going for depth in comparison to the teams that are going for Kyrie and KD. Just you're not going to get that recognition, despite it being a very good day that they had.
Right. Were you surprised that that the Lakers didn't really do that much. I mean, obviously they had the D'Angelo Russell move. They had to get rid of Russell Westbrook. But it kind of felt like that move kind of felt like, like a second option. I think they were really sold on getting Kyrie Irving, and they ended up not getting him. And I think that they really were like, okay, panic time. We got to go get somebody.
Yeah, I think they had. I think if you look at the overall course of what they did, I think they came out very positive. I think they did want Kyrie and didn't get Kyrie, which you can view that as a negative, but I think they rebounded well. I don't love D'Angelo Russell, but the moves to get Vanderbilt, Beasley, you get off Russ, and you only have to give up a first round pick and a second round pick. So they didn't have to give up a bunch of picks, added two young guys that make that team deeper, and at the same time they get off Russ. So for that package, I thought it was good. And then at the same time, you're flipping Pat Bev for Mo Bamba in a second. I thought that was a good trade. So I thought they made a lot of good trades to kind of hit with the depth aspect again. But at the same time, Kyrie would have been nice there. I thought he would have fit well with the Lakers. So it does kind of suck that they didn't get Kyrie, but I do think they became a better team, and I think this helps them in the future too, right? I think this will help them more in the coming years in comparison to if they got Kyrie. Which, when you have LeBron James, who's 38, maybe that's not the smartest way to approach things. But I think they got better. And I think they did well with asset management, where they didn't have a lot of assets. They've traded all those picks for AD. Despite that, they were still able to make some moves. I think if they had the picks that they originally traded for AD, they would have had a little bit more flexibility. Probably would have been able to make some bigger moves. But considering what they had and what they got, I thought they had a good day.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I mean, overall, they had a good couple weeks here. Let's not forget about they did ship off Kendrick Nunn as well, and they got Rui Hachimura. So they're only getting younger at this deadline, and I thought they made a couple good moves. So overall, I want to hear one winner and one loser from the trade deadline.
Okay. So we'll start it off with two losers that I have written down that are not really teams. I can get you teams afterwards, but two players that really did not make out well at the trade deadline. First, John Wall getting shipped back to Houston. He hates Houston, doesn't want to be in Houston. Drug the whole franchise in an interview a couple weeks ago. So John Wall, big loser. Another big loser, Scottie Pippen Jr., who plays for the Lakers. And unfortunately, the Lakers traded for Malik Beasley, who there are some pictures of, Malik Beasley hanging out with Scottie Pippen Jr.'s mother. So bad day for Scottie Pippen Jr. and for John Wall for various reasons. Not really teams that perform or didn't perform well at the deadline, but some players that did not make out very well there.
I wouldn't want to be anybody in that situation. I mean, that is just like the worst. That second situation.
Yeah.
John John Wall publicly trashing the Houston Rockets, and then a week later he gets traded to the Houston Rockets. So if that's not the NBA for you, then I don't know what is. But I know a loser. I was thinking more of a team was the Jazz
team.
Yeah, they got Russell Westbrook. They'll probably buy him out, I'm guessing. So if they end up not getting Russell Westbrook, they'll end up from that 3-team trade with the Lakers and with the Wolves getting Toscano Anderson, getting Damian Jones, and obviously the golden pick of the trade, a top 4 protected first-round pick in 27. So that's really the highlight of that trade. But they gave up a lot, and they're not middling. They had a really good start to this year, so I think they're the losers because they're bowing out with this. I think they're saying we're done. They gave up Mike Conley, who they probably should have given up a little while ago, and then they also gave up Alexander Walker. He's a Jazz player. He was a Jazz player, and then so I thought that trade was kind of strange for them, but and then they really didn't do much else in the deadline at all. So
Mhm.
I thought that was probably a loser.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think they should have got another pick out of that deal. Pretty. I mean, easily. I think that was a two first round trade based off what they were giving up and what they were getting. I think they should have got another first rounder there. So I think they did lose out on the value side of that. At the same time, though, I don't think the Timberwolves really made that great of a trade either. Shipping off D'Lo and bringing Conley in. I mean, that doesn't really feel like you're making a big improvement.
Nope.
It didn't really make sense to me. Where Conley's a little bit of a different player, but at the same time, he's I think he's got another year, a year more, and Russell's going to be a free agent. So I don't know if this is them making sure they have a point guard for next year. I'm just kind of confused as to what really made them so interested in this deal when you're just getting off D'Lo and then you're just getting a different old point guard where Conley's not terrible, but he's far, far out of his prime.
And they also were able to get 3 second rounders out of this deal, which is a trend that we're seeing a lot at this NBA trade deadline this
Mm-hmm.
year. Was these teams just getting a boatload of second round picks? I remember that it was originally reported that the Nets had got Jay Crowder and then immediately flipped him to the Bucks for 5 second round picks. But
Mm-hmm.
then at the that ended up not including the third team in that trade, who ended up being Indiana, who got 3 of those 2nd round picks. So the Nets, out of Jay Crowder, got 2 2nd round picks. I just don't really understand the fascination with 2nd round picks. They don't really end up being great in the NBA. Usually, a lot of the times, they don't even end up playing. But 2nd round picks, I guess, are just depth pieces. So I wonder how many seconds equate to a first, right? Is there any amount that can equate to a first? Um, so, I mean, that's been a confusing trend in this deadline, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of on top of that too, it's like when you trade seconds, I mean, seconds don't always end up being great players, but a lot of times you can use seconds for future flexibility. Whether that be attach a player that you want to get rid of in a second and ship them off, like the Heat did with Deadman, where they take Deadman in a second and send him to the Spurs who are tanking. So it's like I think in a sense where you are losing some future flexibility. And the teams that are good at drafting are the teams that want the seconds, right? If you're a Warriors who find ways to get a good player in the second and develop them and you drafted a talent, a team like that is probably going to be more apt to take on 2nd round picks, which is kind of contradictory because they did, had the opportunity to land 5 seconds, then ship them off for Gary Payton. But I do think teams like that, where if you can draft well in the 2nd round, I mean, give me 5 seconds for Jay Crowder or whoever, where, if you can use those picks right, you can make something happen. But at the same time, a lot of teams don't use them correctly. So if you're not going to use them correctly, then get rid of them. I guess it just
Right.
depends on how you approach your front office if you're running a team.
Yeah.
And then another question that I have for you that we were talking about a little bit in the NBA chat yesterday was the 3-team deal, which ended up being another team got involved here, where the Pistons send Sadiq to the Hawks, and then the Hawks send 5 seconds to Golden State. Golden State takes those 5 seconds and sends them to Portland for Gary Payton. So basically, the Warriors gave up Wiseman, and then they could have basically picked: do we want Sadiq or do we want Gary Payton? If you're in their shoes, are you taking Sadiq or Payton?
I think I understand the argument um, to for Gary Payton. I understand that argument. He's been there before. He's kind of he's a good player. He's a good guy you want on your bench. But I think Sadiq Bey is probably a little better of a player. I thought he has a little more talent, although he may not be that much better of a fit. And hey, man, this 2nd round 5 second rounders. That's a key example right there of that happening.
Mhm.
For Detroit, I really like this one for Detroit actually because they are getting a guy who, hey man, he was the second overall pick. It never worked in Golden State. Maybe it was something about the team scheme fits. I mean, I feel like centers don't really last in Golden State that long. So he's moving on, and the biggest winner of that trade was James Wiseman because he gets a fresh start. He's a guy with a ton of talent. So I'm really happy that he was able to get a fresh start, especially with how poorly he's played since he got drafted by the Warriors. And I think the Hawks really swooped in here because I think they were probably not in the trade for a little while, and then Golden State got on the phone and they said, "Hey, who wants Sadiq Bey?" And
Mhm.
Atlanta's like, they hopped on that. So I mean, that's a good pickup for them. I think that they quietly had a pretty good deadline, but if I'm Atlanta, I'm jumping all over that. And if I'm Golden State, I understand why you trade Bay, but I personally probably would not have done that.
Gotcha. I took the opposite stance of that. I said Gary Payton, and that's not a diss on Sadiq Bey. I think Sadiq Bey is a great player. I agree with everything you said about Sadiq Bey, and he would fit well in Golden State. I think ultimately Golden State was looking at a win-win here, whether it be Payton or whether it be Sadiq Bey. I just said Payton because of the defense, where he's a better defensive player. Sadiq Bey is not that great defensively at the wing. Well, maybe he can be, but he was at a minimum underperforming in Detroit. Maybe that's because when you're playing in Detroit and you've won 13 games all year, you're not strapping it up to go play defense every possession. Maybe that's why. I wouldn't put that past him. I wouldn't really blame him either. You know, Pistons don't care. Give up points, lose, maybe get Wembanyama. So maybe he'll be a better defender in Atlanta, but I do think it's close. But I was on the side of Peyton, just slightly, not overly convicted in that opinion, though. And then as far as the Wiseman part of that deal goes, I think it's interesting just because I agree with the main point of that, where it's you get Wiseman and you hope he reaches his potential, and you don't want to give Sadiq Bey a contract in 2 years when he runs out. But at the same time, my issue with it is that James Wiseman and Jalen Duren are the same player. You can't play James Wiseman and Jalen Duren at the same time. You're going to have two 7-footers who can't shoot. If one of them could shoot, it'd be great, it'd be outstanding. But neither of them can shoot, which is what I don't like about the trade. If we didn't have Jalen Duren, I'd be all over it. But there's just some concern here with the Pistons as how you play Duren and Wiseman together, and then if Wiseman and Duren both end up being great players, do you have to ship one off? How do you play them together? So that was my concern there. But I do agree once again with the overall sentiment of you don't want to pay Sadiq, so you get a new talented young player and see if he can reach his potential. So I do agree with that in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I didn't really think about when they first made that move. And maybe I'm just not really up on the Pistons as much because they're a little irrelevant
Yeah.
in my sphere a little bit. But yeah, I do see that now. That's going to be tough to get them both on the floor. They probably won't get them both on the floor at the same time. But I don't even think Wiseman's ready to play. Like
Yep.
he's not really. If there's a team I would let him play for, it would probably be Detroit. So
Yep. He hopefully he comes off the bench, gets some minutes, and is a good bench big. If we get that out of this deal, I'll be happy because ultimately, the Pistons are going to need a better wing than Sadiq in the future. And in this year's draft, there's a couple guys. We don't need to get too big into the NBA draft here, but maybe they could add a wing or get lucky with Wembanyama and throw him at the 4. So there's some things that they can do to add some wing depth this offseason. So losing Sadiq won't be the end of the world, I don't think.
yeah.
And then kind of wrapping up the deadline and then switching over to the NFL awards and the NFL Hall of Fame, which were both last night. I guess to start it off, what do you make of the Rookie of the Year votings? Good night for the Jets. Offensive player and defense, or excuse me, offensive Rookie of the Year and defensive Rookie of the Year are both there in New York wearing green. So, what do you make of that? Do you think they both deserve it? And what's your initial reaction?
Initial reaction was I was really happy for those guys. Sauce Gardner was probably a lock for that award. That's been known since I probably September, October that he was going to win that award. So that was a lock. I was really happy for Sauce. He had an outstanding season, much deserve it. And hey, man, the future's looking up for the Jets. They just got to get a quarterback before they can really start to look like a pretty good team. And I thought that the way that the NFL is doing the Rookie of the Year voting now, and I think all voting together, is it's 5-3-1 depending on what you pick. So Kenneth Walker got more first place votes than Garrett Wilson did for Offensive Rookie of the Year. But Wilson won the award because I think he had something like 9 second place finishes, and it was enough points to push him over Walker's like 130 total points, and Wilson had like 145 or something. So, I mean, say what you want about that. I think it's kind of cool how they do that, but I can see how a lot of Seattle fans would be upset by like something like that because, Walker did get more first place votes. But I'm not saying that Walker should have won the award.
Yeah.
I was actually most surprised that that it ended up being Chris Olave that got like almost no attention for the award. Garrett Wilson and him had very similar seasons. And I wish he got a little more attention. But yeah, there were some really, really good rookies this year on both sides of the ball. I think a lot of the times we can see like top heavy rookies. Like there's rookies that come into the league and, they're really good but everybody else is not really that good. So, they win the award basically by default. But this year it was a really good competition on both sides, and we got a ton of really good players that got drafted this year. So it's exciting for the future for sure.
Yeah. You made a couple really good points there. And I just want to note that it's also not just the NFL that does that voting system either. That's pretty similar across a lot of sports where I know the MLB does it where Porcello got a Cy Young over Verlander, even though Verlander had the most first place votes at 1.2. So that's not unprecedented. And I do agree where if I'm a voter, I probably go Wilson, Walker, Olave are probably my 1, 2, 3 in that order. So I agree with everything you said there. Defensively, I do also agree that it should be Sauce Gardner there, where I think the only other competition was Aiden Hutchinson. Aiden Hutchinson had a great year on paper, 9.5 sacks, 3 interceptions, much better year from the stats. But really, when you're a dominant cornerback, the stats don't always, show the full picture in this one. So I think it's like Sauce Gardner is someone who made a difference and became an elite player first year in the league. I think, if you're picking between Aiden Hutchinson and Sauce Gardner, one of them played at an elite level, and as good as Aiden Hutchinson was in the box score, I think his lows were a little bit lower than Sauce Gardner. Sauce Gardner came in and played at a elite level from the very first day, which is something that very few guys do. And it's even more impressive that it's at corner, where right now, I guess there's a lot of good young corners right now, but corners, I don't think is an easy position just to step in and play well at right away, especially with all the dynamic guys we have in the league at receiver.
We should have seen it coming in the college football playoff game when Nick Saban did not target Sauce Gardner one time.
That'll tell you a lot.
Cincinnati, that'll tell you a lot. Sauce Gardner, during his last year at Cincinnati, got targeted I think 12 times the entire season. The
legendary year.
Did not throw at him. They understood that what kind of player he was. I mean, he's a pro. He's a pro. He was a pro in college, and he got to the league, and he became a pro, he's like, if you could build a corner in a lab, it's probably Sauce Gardner.
Yep.
So, yeah, he's going to be great. The Jets, they really hit a home run in the draft this past year. So it's exciting, man. I'm excited for them.
Yeah.
And just going on a couple different awards.
Yep.
Coach of the Year, Brian Dable. I thought that was pretty deserved. He brought the Giants roster, which was really not anything good at all, and brought them to where they needed to be. And they got all the way to the divisional round. Daniel Jones looked like a completely different player in 2022 than he did in years past. So I think he deserves a ton of credit for what he did in New York this past season.
Yep. I think the second that they made the playoffs, I think it's a absolute lock that Daboll was the coach of the year, because on paper that's not a playoff roster. And that's, that sucks for the Giants, but that's a big compliment to Daboll and his coaching ability, where if you get him some more talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball, especially at receiver, that team starts to look a lot better. And especially, you already have the head coach, which for some teams, they just can't find that head coach. The Giants have it.
Yeah, and they should be really good for the whole next couple of years here, and they can draft well, and they can really look good. And that goes for both New York teams.
Yep.
Both New York teams are definitely on the upswing, but they might both have different quarterbacks next season. The Jets obviously probably will have a different quarterback next season. New York Giants, not maybe as much. They're trending towards re-signing Daniel Jones at a tall price tag right now.
What do you make of that? What do you are you a Giants fan?
I am a Giants fan.
That's what I thought. I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Giants fan. What's your contract for Jones that you'd be willing to give out? Do you want the Giants to bring him back? What's your thought process on that? While we're on the topic,
it's hard for me to decide, because Jones he really brought us so many great moments last season, and he was really good when it mattered. Even in the first game against Minnesota, the game that we lost in the regular season, he brought us down the field, tied the game. Game against Washington, he was able to get down the field. We were able to, get down the field and really get deep and win games because of Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones made way less mistakes this season than he had in any other season in his career. He had the most rushing yards in his career. He had the best season of his career. Is that going to continue? We'll see. I feel like he can only get better under Brian Dable. So him and Dable already have that connection. You have the money. Giants have the third most, if I'm not mistaken, the third most cap in the NFL right now for this upcoming offseason.
Mm-hmm.
Pull the trigger. I'd say Daniel Jones is probably more of a priority than Saquon Barkley at this point. Ooh. I'd say you give him $30 million a year.
How many years?
I think we're going 3 years, $90 million. If I had to make a contract right now for Daniel Jones, I'd probably give him three and 90, $50 million guaranteed, and say, hey man, we're doing this. We're buying in on you right now, and we're gonna build this offense. We're gonna build this team. Daniel Jones had next to no weapons last season. He had a pouting Kenny Golladay that they don't throw the ball to. They had Darius Slayton, who has had more drops than a lot of receivers in the last 3 NFL seasons. And they didn't have anybody. They traded Kadarius Toney. They were in full downswing when it was coming to the offensive weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up going 9-7-1, winning a playoff game. And it's not like they were in a bad division and they snuck in and they somehow won a playoff game. They were in probably the best division in football this past season.
Yeah.
So you stay with Jones. If things work in the NFL, don't change it.
Fair enough. I think that's a little rich for me, for my blood on Daniel Jones, but at the same time, I'm not gonna, raise a stir over it. He played well this year. And I also don't think it's crazy to say it's more because it's like with Barkley, Like, I don't know how much money he's going to demand this year. But at the same time, he's a running back who's been injured. Giving a lot of money to running backs usually doesn't work out. And especially a guy that's already been injured, you know, I think that's also another tricky situation that isn't really being talked about a lot.
Yeah, and the running back market in the NFL has always been one of the biggest debates in the sport. Is do you pay running backs a lot of money? They're not really sustainable. How many years are you going to give Saquon Barkley? You want to
Mhm.
pay Saquon Barkley what he wants for the next 4 seasons? Do you know Saquon's going to be really good in 2 seasons? So it's tough to decipher. Um, but I think quarterbacks are much more of a sure thing, and I think offensive scheme is important when it comes to you have an clearly offensive mastermind, Brian Dable. And you just look at Buffalo. You look at Buffalo this past season, their offense was different this past year without
Mhm.
Brian Dable. And everybody saw it, everybody knew it. And even the announcers at points during games were saying, hey man, they don't have Brian Dable anymore. This is an adjustment period for sure. So I think that's really valuable to have a quarterback and head coach combo that works.
Mhm.
So I'd stick with that if I were New York.
Yeah.
But working on some other awards here from the NFL honors.
Yep. Go for it. Go for it.
What is your opinion on comeback player of the year? Because a lot of people say comeback player of the year should be an award for people that got injured the season before, not for people that were bad.
Yeah.
So
I
Geno Smith wins the award, but he was just not good last year. He didn't play. Instead of a guy like Barkley who got hurt, guy like who else was up for it? Was it
uh,
Bosa, right?
CMC and Brandon Graham, I think were the
Okay,
other
yeah.
two big ones. But yeah, this was something that I wanted to talk about because I agree where I think comeback player of the year should be a position where you were hurt or something happened where you couldn't get out on the field. But like Geno Smith was just a backup. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to take anything away from Geno Smith or what he did because he had a great year, and it's more of a resurgence than a comeback in a way where he was able to finally find the starter quality that he's been looking for. And credit to him, great year, a lot of improvements. Maybe if there was a most improved player in the NFL, that would be Geno Smith. Um, but at the same time, I like to reserve comeback player of the year for someone who's coming back from something. Because like Brandon Graham coming back from a torn Achilles, where that is not an easy thing to come back from. A lot of these guys who are in the running for comeback player of the year are coming back from some form of adversity. Geno Smith was not that. I'm glad you brought this up because this was something that I wanted to touch on. I'm not giving that award to Geno Smith. And I just don't think he fits comeback player of the year. That's my thought on that.
So who would you have win?
I probably go. I'll give it to Barkley. I guess. I mean, the three CMC, Barkley, and Graham. Like, I'm not going to complain either way. I think those guys all three deserve it. But like, I think Barkley probably had. That's tough. I could go CMC or Barkley. I can see both, just because I think it's a little bit harder at running back, and those guys played at a higher level than Brandon Graham this year. So CMC, Barkley, toss up, I guess. But I probably would have gone Barkley.
It's very on brand for the NFL to just give it to the quarterback.
Yeah,
So,
that's a good point.
and we really were close to a New York sweep. We were
Yeah.
close to getting offensive, defensive rookie of the year, coach of the year, and comeback player of the year, all from
Hmm.
the two New York teams, or two New York teams, I should say, two New York Metro teams.
Yep.
Can't forget about the Bills. But yeah, moving on a little bit. I know offensive player of the year was Jefferson. I think that was kind of a lock as well, kind of
Yep.
like Sauce. Um, and the Hall of Fame was announced last night.
Hmm.
And we had a bunch of people get inducted. We have Joe Thomas, Zach Thomas, DeMarcus Ware, Darrell Revis, which I'm so happy to see that he's finally getting his, Rondé Barber,
Hmm.
and then we have Coach Don Coryell, who is deceased, linebacker Chuck Howley, defensive lineman Joe Klecko, and cornerback Ken Riley. So that's going to be the Hall of Fame class for this season. It's a really great Hall of Fame class. I think a
It
lot
is.
of the
Yeah.
guys we're starting to get to the point here that we grew up with these guys and now they're getting into the Hall of Fame, which is kind
Yeah,
of weird.
it is.
Darrelle Revis, DeMarcus Ware, Joe Thomas. I mean, those guys in the 2010s and were awesome. Like they were the guys that were like, hey man, like these guys have a chance to get Hall of Fame. I'm happy DeMarcus Ware got there. I didn't necessarily think of him when he retired as necessarily a guy that could be in the Hall of Fame, but hey man, he got there, and good for him. And year 2, Devin Hester, nothing. I can't even begin to comprehend why he has not been inducted into the Hall of Fame yet. He's got the most kick return touchdowns of all time. I mean, that right there should get him into the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm. I think it is like with Hester. Hester also was not close. He was cut at the 10 mark and not the mark to get it to 5. So he was also outside of the top 10. So not even close there. Some of the guys in the top 5, I'd have to look up the names again, but there were a lot of really good players in that group. So it's not like he's getting snubbed for guys that are real questionable. So the guys that were ahead of him were all very good. But I do agree with once again, the overall sentiment of he's the best kick returner of all time. And I think that should be like, it's tough to compare a kick returner, a punter, or a kicker in comparison to someone who was an elite defensive end for 10 years. Like it's such a hard, you have to grade them differently in a way. And I do think we should see more of these special teams guys getting in general, not just Devin Hester. But if you were the best punter in the NFL for 10 years, you should be a Hall of Famer. So I almost think there should be like I don't want to say a separate category, but a different type of threshold to get some more of these special teams guys in. Because if you're not, like, I don't know how many kickers are in the Hall of Fame off the top of my head, but kickers can get in, punters not that often, kick returners none. And if you're going to start with that, I think Devin Hester is a great example of someone who's struggling to get in, who is the best of his position, who is a special teamer.
I remember Ray Guy getting in as a punter, and that's the only one I can remember of the last 10 years, just off the top of my head. Like that's the only special teams guy that I can even remember. I'm sure that there's somebody that I'm missing. But yeah, so special teams is disrespected in the game. I mean, this guy Devin Hester, like he had an amazing career, and he was one of the primary reasons that Chicago got to that Super Bowl that one year. I mean, he had I want to say 7 kick return touchdowns that year. Crazy.
He took the first kickoff in the Super Bowl to the crib. Like that's
opening kickoff.
Yeah, that's definition of difference maker right there.
So what I mean, I have a feeling he'll get in down the line. I think the NFL will come to their senses and he'll get in.
Yeah, I would call for the overall just push for more special teams players. Once again, not against like a great quarterback's going to get in 10 times out of 10. That's not who we should be comparing these special teams guys to in terms of Hall of Fame and should they get in. Also, if you talk to people in the NFL or listen to what they have to say, they'll tell you how important special teams is. Everyone says how important it is, and then it gets no love when it comes time for award season or anything like this.
Yep, it's tough, but.
And then we had a couple of finishing thoughts here before we get out of here. We had a Mets commercial, and we're going to revisit the Mookie Betts trade. So we can quickly hit on those topics before we get out of here.
A little MLB action today,
to
finish off the show. So yeah, Steve Cohen and the New York Mets, they're buying a Super Bowl commercial in the tri-state area. It's only going to air there. But it's pretty awesome that they were able to buy a commercial with $1 million. So obviously it's not cheap. It's like a player right there. Yeah. So it's clear what the Mets are doing. They're building not only a team that wants to win a World Series, a team that's going to be there for a little while, and a team that wants to get it down the line, but they're building a brand more than anything. They're building a brand for free agents to come. They're building a brand so that they can take over the top spot and be the primary team in New York against the Yankees. I mean, it's just it's really cool that they're airing that in the tri-state area, in my opinion. But hey, maybe I'm just a biased Mets fan.
Yeah, and the MLB is a league where, based on the structure of that league, the people with more money have more success, and that's actually becoming more true in the NBA and NFL as well. Some salaries cap loopholes and such, but that's in the MLB. That's always been the teams with more money. If you can pay free agents more, you can be more successful, and not every team in the league is bringing in as big of just ask the A's, ask the Rockies. I'm sure they'd love to be in a position like the Mets. So I think it makes sense. Build a brand. You see a lot of people in New York rocking the New York Yankees hats. Let's start turning some of those hats into Mets hats. So I agree with you. It's a good way to build a brand. And if you're gonna invest in players, you might as well invest in building a brand and doing these outside things to get you more money in the long run as well. You can invest in things other than players, which you need to do, but there's some ways you can have success outside of that too.
And they've got, I don't know if you've seen the commercial or not, but they've got I watched it last week because I'm not going to be able to see it here in Arizona. They're not going to air it on TV. Like I said, it's only going to be in the tri-state area. But yeah, they've got all the guys that they paid. They've got Edwin Diaz comes out and he's doing the closer thing, and then they've got Brandon Nimmo runs that in the beginning, and then they've got Lindor in there, and they've got Jeff McNeil, I believe, is in the commercial. So yeah, the guys that they paid, the guys that they're going to be there, the core, they're featured in that commercial is pretty cool.
Yeah, good way to get fans pumped up. Good way to get fans pumped up.
For sure. Mets fans are going to see that. If they haven't already seen it, if they see it, Mets fans in the tri-state area are going to see that, and they're going to absolutely love it. So, but yeah, 2 years ago today, the Red Sox, they shipped off Mookie Betts, which, man, I can't even. How do you do that? They shipped off Mookie Betts and David Price to the Dodgers for Alex Verdugo, Jeter Downs, and Connor Wong.
For anyone that has been following Vendetta or Vendetta's MLB content, they know how Trey feels about the Red Sox in some of their trades. And Trey has been all over this in terms of, this Mookie Betts trade. Jeter Downs has been DFA'd, and Verdugo, not a bad player. I mean, he's a fine player, but you traded Mookie Betts away.
But that's the return you got.
Yeah, the issue is the return. Yeah. God awful trade. Really
awful. I mean, you look back on it and you say, man, like Jeter Downs was like, they really wanted something out of Jeter Downs. What he could have been. I know they DFA'd him, but what he still can be in the league. I just don't understand how you trade Mookie Betts, and you don't find a better deal. I mean, if that's what you're going to trade, if you're saying, hey, like he's going to walk, we're not going to be able to pay him, we're going to trade him. That's what you're giving him, especially. And then what? Mookie signs with the Dodgers. What was that, like a week later? He signed with the Dodgers, and he signed like for 10 years and $300 million, whatever his contract was. So that one really hurts for the Red Sox. That trade set them back.
Yeah,
years.
They're in a bad spot right now. Very bad spot. Yeah. Lost out on Bogaerts too. That kind of, that deal. I'm not sure that's when you want to sign Bogaerts too, but it's like, if you don't trade Mookie Betts away, this doesn't feel as bad seeing Xander go. If you get a better return and you've got some better young players right now that are making their debuts or had a good year last year, then, that doesn't burn as bad, but it's the mistakes that are stacked on top of each other is when we start getting into issues.
Yeah, there's a graphic that NBC Sports and Boston and Nesson were playing this past offseason of what Kyle Bloom's kind of trajectory has been since taking over as the GM of the Red Sox, and it's just they've really teared it down, and it's a completely different roster than it was a couple of years ago. But what can you do? You trade off Mookie Betts, and the AL East is tough. They're going to finish last. I mean, they're going to finish last in that division. They
Yeah.
are not better than the Yankees, that's for sure. They're not better than Toronto or Tampa Bay. And you can't say they're better than the Orioles. The Orioles are deep, and they have a deep farm that they're probably going to tap into. It's not the Orioles. This is not going to be the Orioles season this season, but 2-3 years down the line, if you're telling me the Red Sox are going to have a better record in 2 seasons than the Orioles, I would say you're mad, because they're just not going to. The Orioles have one of the deepest farms in baseball, and they're stacked, and the Red Sox are looking like the odd man out in that division.
Yeah. And, even worst case scenario or best case scenario, they finished fourth in the AL East. Say they beat out the Orioles. Well, that's not really an accomplishment anyway. It's just like you still suck. It's just a matter of how bad you suck.
And they're not going to be better than Toronto, Tampa Bay, or New York. Those 3 teams are win now teams, and they're better than Boston.
Yep. I think that's a good way to end it there. Just kind of poking some fun at the Red Sox for the mistakes that they made. So
hey, Boston sports has won a lot these last 20
have.
years. We can dog on them a little bit if they do something wrong.
They have. I as a Detroit fan, I get to see my team be good. We got Michigan right now, so I won't say too much. But I have been in a position where I've seen plenty of teams that suck. So it all comes around eventually.
For sure. I'm a little happy to see Boston failing a little bit. As a New York guy, I'm not a huge Yankees fan. I'm a Mets fan more than a Yankees fan. So I don't really prey on the Red Sox downfall, but it is something that, hey,
not gonna hate.
They won with Brady all those years.
Yeah.
The Bruins have had success. Celtics are really good right now. They don't have to have Boston be good too.
You can have one crappy team in there.
Yeah.
We discussed a lot today. Pretty good episode. We touched on the Super Bowl a lot, NBA trade deadline, NFL awards, Hall of Fame, touched all the bases. So ended it out with some baseball, hitting hitting 3 sports here. So pretty good day here at the Vendetta Sports Media live show, February 10th. And Julian, it was nice talking to you. Had a great time. Hope everyone listening had a good time.
Yeah, let's do it. Good Super Bowl. Here we go.
That's right.
Chiefs, Eagles. It's going to be a good one.
It's going to be great.